From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and coming up today, K-State's Dan O'Brien telling why he perceives a glimmer of optimism for improved grain prices. And Dan will talk about new information from K-State on variable storage rates for wheat futures contracts during his weekly segment on the grain market trends. Also today, K-State's Ajay Sharda and Terry Griffin will look ahead to the 2018 Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference, being co-hosted by K-State in 2 weeks. They'll visit about several of the up-and-coming technologies that will be discussed in full at this conference. And K-State's Mary Knapp awaits to report on Kansas agricultural weather, plus more, here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Well, the grain markets, as the new year 2018 gets rolling, are searching for something of a spark that might be out there. And we'll talk about that as we get into the grain market trends opening up 2018. Dan O'Brien, along with us once again, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. It really is hard to pin down anything to get even remotely enthused about in these markets right now, Dan.
It is, except that there are some underlying signs of support, and I think we see it in the corn, grain, sorghum, and wheat markets when we look at the basis levels. Corn basis in say Salina in the central part of the state, and Ulysses out to the west, you see in essence basis levels that haven't collapsed at all. For corn in Salina at one of their major independent elevators, you've seen the basis actually. Well, from about the 30th week of the year, 2017, it was about 60 under, strengthened to about 45 under. And, and here we have large crops. We've had piles of grain, although some of those piles are moving now with usage. We've seen the basis actually strengthen some. So that's a positive. Basis out to the west in Ulysses, running just about even with futures or slightly under. So that's a positive as well. Of course, grain, sorghum basis bids, central part of the state, were about 60, 70 under through the middle part of 2017. And here, as we finish up, as we look at basically what happened at the end of last year, we've come up to level or just a few cents under in terms of cash prices relative to futures. So that's a positive in terms of what we see in the central part of the state. Out to the west, we have seen some basis improvement, probably about 20, 30 cents, still about in the Ulysses area anyway, listed as about 50 under, 45, 50 under, thereabouts. So, again, if we were in a complete washout market, we'd be seeing more weakness.
So you're looking at it as the glass half full, basically, at this point.
Well, I think there are underlying evidences of demand. The one great thing about low prices is it gives users good incentive to buy grain to use for various industrial and livestock feeding and export uses. And we've seen with the strong economic signals that we've been seeing here in the U.S. of late, stock market and in the general economy, the price of energy has been moving to the high side. Here we've got a price of oil on the major exchanges having moved up to $60, $61, $62, thereabouts. The price of gasoline up to about $1.95 in the futures, the last day or so, $1.90, $1.95. And that run-up in the fuel sector has helped ethanol usage. In fact, we've seen within the last month one or two of the highest amounts of grain ethanol production we've ever seen on record. So that's good. We're moving some grain in that manner. Livestock feed numbers in the beef and the pork side up around 5%, give or take just a little bit for both. Even poultry up about just under 2%, even turkeys up a little bit. So livestock feeding running pretty well. Of course, we'll get more information on the livestock feed side and the pace of that when we come into that January 12th quarterly stocks report. So we'll be watching for that. We've been kind of bemoaning that exports haven't been as good on a weekly basis in terms of actual shipments for a number of our major crops. For corn, we've been running behind. In the last week, ending December the 28th, about 27 million bushels in the shipments report that had come out. So that number's running behind about the 40 to 43 we need to meet the USDA's projections. But forward sales are still running positive. We're at about 53% of the USDA's projection, only about 31% of the way through the marketing year. So that's a positive. That would indicate that eventually grain come out of storage and make it into overseas markets. Grain sorghum has been running strong. We've been talking about that, Eric, for quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Actual shipments here this last week, ending the 28th of December, about just under 5 million bushels, need about 5.6 to meet the USDA's ramped up projection of 260 million bushels. So after several strong weeks in a row, they had a so-so week. But again, overall, we're about 65, 66% of the way to meeting the USDA's projection if you count shipments and forward sales, and again, only about 31% of the year. Where we really would value export movement would be in the wheat market, and we've been running slow overall for U.S. wheat, about 10 million bushels this last week, need about 20 to meet the USDA's projection. Hard red had a relatively good week in terms of those last numbers. Again, about 8.7 million, need about 9.25 million bushels a week to meet the USDA's projections, so within the ballpark. And again, even for hard red winter, we're about 70, 71% of the way to the USDA's total when you consider shipments and what's bought ahead, and we're about 58, 59% of the way through the marketing year. So I guess I would say that there are some positives for these major crops. Even on soybeans, I need to mention that we're about 66 to 67% of the way through the USDA's projection, with only about 31% of the marketing year complete. Again, kind of waiting for weakening in South America of their export pace to allow us to move that much more here in the next several months. So overall, some positives. I think the eyes of the market are looking longer term for what we might have to deal with once we get out into March, April, May in terms of dry soil conditions. Right. No real relief has been seen in some of the driest areas that have been developing, and these aren't minor areas. We're seeing dryness not just in parts of Kansas, which we're greatly concerned about for the winter wheat crop, but we're seeing a very dry drought conditions developing in parts of Illinois, the eastern half of Missouri, up into parts of Iowa now, and again, they've been short of moisture. The whole state of Iowa has only had about 10 to 25% of normal moisture accumulations over the last 30 days. So, Eric, I remember in 2015 we had Elwyn Taylor come and speak to a Risk and Profit conference. He was talking about El Niños versus La Niña patterns. And his key point in that presentation was that when we have an El Niño pattern, we tend to have a lot of moisture in the U.S. and we tend to have good crops. And we have a La Niña pattern, we're at greater risk to having real dry conditions come in and affect us. So we, again, have news coming from the weather watchers that we have at least a moderate to growing La Niña condition that does put us at somewhat greater risk for drier conditions throughout the U.S. growing regions. So are we trying to bang the drum for the markets to pay attention to that? Well, not necessarily, but the point is that with this weather pattern, we are at greater risk to this. Yeah. And what we really aren't paying a lot of attention to now could be all that much more of an important issue once we get off into the spring. That would have an impact on people storing old crop, 2017 corn, grain, sorghum, soybeans, or wheat, even if they're still holding that. And, would give us the possibility of some higher prices and even maybe some forward pricing moves if we have good crop insurance coverage, of course, as we look out to the 2018 harvest. So these weather conditions are probably the primary issue that we have on the table that's still in front of us that could give us some better prices for old crop and possibly some new crop pricing moves off into next year. And so that's what we'll be watching and focusing on.
Possibilities and opportunities that need to be monitored very closely by our producers. One last thing this week, Dan, you have posted now on the agmanager.info website within your weekly grain market notes and otherwise information now on variable storage rates aligned with the Kansas City and Chicago wheat futures contracts.
Well, starting with the May contract, CME will be using what they call a variable storage rate mechanism to determine kind of the internal storage rate to be charged for any grain that's delivered on those contracts. Mm-hmm. And how it affects us out in the country is that as this internal variable storage rate would raise up higher and higher, it makes it harder and harder for anybody that was delivered on, again, a short to deliver on a long. If a long is holding that contract, then it would make it just that much more difficult for them to profitably just hold that piece of paper, that warehouse receipt, and pay interest on it as opposed to having to cash it out in the market.
The hope here is to promote convergence of the prices, which we've talked about before, right?
Yes, and to improve basis levels. So without getting too far off into the weeds and all the details of this, and it's not necessarily an easy thing to understand, but we are now looking at those the CME sheets that they put out. We've added in both our notes for this program and also just on AgManage overall, added some explanatory text to help people understand what they're seeing when they see these calculations. So if somebody's storing wheat, maybe wants to do a storage hedge on them, wondering about selling now or even wondering how the VSRs may affect future contracts down the road, it'd be really good now that we have this thing to have some inkling, some perception of just what this VSR will do to the dynamics of these wheat futures contracts as we move forward off into 2018.
Well, producers, that information, again, is found now and will be updated regularly on the agmanager.info website out of K-State. So catch a look at that. Dan, many thanks for the comments. As always, we'll talk again next Friday.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
This week's grain market commentary from Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. Agriculture Today returns shortly here on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Agriculture Today is back now here on the K-State Radio Network. The latest in agricultural technology will be up for full discussion and to a certain extent display at the 2018 Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference, co-sponsored by K-State Research and Extension, along with the Kansas Ag Research and Technology Association, known as CARTA for short. With us once again, Ajay Sharda. He's a precision agricultural engineer here at K-State and precision agricultural economist at K-State, Terry Griffin. They'll both be on hand for this conference coming up January the 18th and the 19th. They will be presenting a bit as well there. Terry, we'll start with you. This is year in and year out a premier opportunity for growers and others to learn about what's new in ag technology.
It is, Eric. It's a great opportunity for networking. There's 140-something farmers usually come to this. This is the third year in our new location in Junction City, Kansas. But, yeah, it's been going on for 21 years. Last year we had our 20th anniversary, brought back some folks who were involved in the first couple of conferences and discussed how the world has changed or maybe not changed. And this year we're going to go around the corner and look into the future a little bit.
AJ, as you look at this conference, how do you perceive its value to producers out there?
I think this is a great place where it's a perfect synergy between producers who are on the upper end of technology adoption and utilization. They understand crop production. They understand economics. They're always looking for newer technology to adopt, to understand, to learn. Then there are people who are coming out from industry or academia to talk about some of the newer work which is going around. And then people like general farmers and participants. There's a great environment where lots of open-end discussion goes on, and people are free to throw their ideas out and discuss both ways in terms of pros and cons of that technology versus practices. So it's a perfect place to be in terms of learning what's going on, share your thoughts about your own experiences with people who are in the similar business of crop production, learn something new, and then walk away with some really good key points at the end of the day.
And folks who have attended in the past will reemphasize this, but the uniqueness of this format is that it is very interactive. It's not just a series of PowerPoint presentations and papers handed out. There is great dialogue through and through.
Absolutely. And I think this one very unique aspect of this conference is also after our supper the first day, we choose a topic to talk about, and people sit down for the next 2.5, 3 hours and have discussion on that point. And normally that discussion point is something which is really up and coming, where people have different opinions, there are different perspectives out there, but it has value for people to go out and try it. So I think that is very unique for this conference.
Now, Terry, you said that this conference will not so much look in the rearview mirror as peer around the corner to what's next. So in that respect, what do you see on the program here that would be considered a highlight or two?
Well, we have 5 out-of-state speakers who are nationally, internationally known, and Ajay was speaking about how our Thursday night session is, we try to do something controversial to get a reaction. Jeremy Wilson, he works for Crop IMS. He farms in Illinois, and I've known Jeremy for quite some time, and he has some really good insights from industry as well as production agriculture. He is going to talk about how make sure that we're harvesting our assets to the best of our ability, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he has to say, and I'm going to kind of sit back and watch the interaction of the crowd during his presentation. One of the new things, you've heard me talk about automation and, automated guidance is adopted more than yield monitors because of, some obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. Blue River Technology will be there at CARTA this year and talking about autonomous technology. And so that's going to be peering around the corner.
Yeah, that's the next
wave.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. It's going to be quite interesting. Also, kind of along those same lines, we've got Jason Ward coming in from North Carolina State University. Jason's had a history with Mississippi State as well as AGCO, and he's going to be speaking about the Internet of Machines and talking about how farm data is used at the farm level as well as the corporate level, and maybe give us some ideas of some win-win scenarios that we can expect in the future. We also have Brian Arnell coming in from Oklahoma State. Many of our listeners will know who Brian is and be familiar with him, and his topic will be on variable rate fertility, but I suspect that if you cornered him in a hallway, he'd be more than happy to talk to you about what he thinks about mobile apps on your phone. He's sort of a national expert on that as well.
So it's a loaded program, and we can't overstate the depth of the program and the panel discussions and, in fact, the kinds of things that both of you will be passing along as part of the rapid-fire sessions out of K-State. What are you going to be speaking on, AJ?
Eric, I'm going to talk a little bit about the pulse width modulation technology for liquid application. In the past, we've talked about something like high-speed planting technologies, but liquid application is another up-and-coming. It's a hot topic all the time. We have seen some new things this year in terms of the drift aspect of it, new regulations, product. So understanding technology, it has really some really good benefits. Almost every manufacturer has switched to pulse width modulation over the last 2 to 3 years. So I think we are in the right time in terms of telling the producers, what this technology is all about and, to offer.
And Terry, what will you offer up?
We're going to give an update on some of the adoption statistics in Kansas. We're going to have a poster to match it. So in rapid fire, we're going to, can't remember how many minutes that each of the K-State faculty will have, but not very long. So we got to get out pretty quick. And we're going to have a poster session as well. and we'll have some of the same information on those, and the posters will be mostly graduate students, and those will be available in the area where the vendors, our exhibit hall, will be.
So it's quite a mix of university expertise, those from the industry itself, farmers who have employed technology and have been on the cutting edge of actual on-farm research as members of CARTA. You have a lot of moving parts to this program. It's been exceptional over the years. And how to participate, there's plenty of time to register yet, Terry.
January 10 is sort of our early bird cutoff.
That's next Wednesday.
If you register by January 10, it's going to be $50 off. Something new we're going to try this year is any post-secondary student in the state of Kansas, that could be K-State, Fort Hays State, Highland Community College, or others, they can register for $75 for the full conference.
So you're trying to attract young folks in to get their feet wet in this area as well.
From my perspective, I think this is a great opportunity for those students to come out and at least interact with faculty out of K-State, with producers who are there in terms of active participation, and industry people and academic people from outside the state. I have learned a lot. Every time I go there, whatever work we are doing, talk about what they think about their research, or just get the general idea on a technology adoption, or the aspect of profitability, the usability of any technology. So whatever your goal is, whether you want to go, learn about technology adoption, or, the educational component, or research, you can do all. And then you can also network with the right people to interact beyond this meeting as well.
It is an outstanding opportunity across the board. The basic admission is $275 for both days, noting that includes everything: proceedings, materials, meals, refreshments, and so forth. And you can save $50 on that registration fee if you get on the books no later than this coming Wednesday, January the 10th. There's also information, finally here, Terry, on the CARTA website concerning the conference itself, right?
Everything's on the website. Our agenda's up, and you can register online.
And you can do so at this address, CARTA, KARTA-online.org, CARTA-online.org to register online. Again, get that done before too long now. Well, we're wishing the both of you good luck in the presentations you'll be putting forth at this big meeting coming up here not too long from now. And thanks for giving us a notion of what's on the agenda there. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Eric. We're looking forward to it.
K-State Research and Extension's Terry Griffin and Ajay Sharda. Terry, a precision agricultural economist, and Ajay, a precision agricultural engineer. Both of them will be on the program along with many other leaders in this area of precision agricultural technology at the 2018 Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference once more. It's taking place on Thursday and Friday, January the 18th and the 19th in Junction City at the Geary County Convention Center. CARTAonline.org for more information or online registration. This is Agriculture Today. Now we'll break away for a few moments. When we come back, today's agricultural news headlines coming your way. And standing by to talk about an exciting new development in wheat research facilities. Here in Manhattan, Marcia Boswell with the Kansas Wheat Scoop. And more still ahead here on the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggle to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Before we get into today's agricultural news headlines, wanted to pass this along. If you weren't aware already, the K-State community and Kansas agriculture lost one of the great ones over the holiday break. Dr. Jack Riley passed away December the 26th here in Manhattan. Jack came to K-State in 1971 as an associate professor in animal sciences and industry. He was the faculty coordinator of the Beef Research Unit for 16 years, coordinator of all research activities for the department for 3 years, and in 1987, Jack was named the Animal Sciences and Industry Department head, serving in that capacity for 17 years, until 2004, when he entered phased retirement, returning to a part-time faculty teaching position then, Jack fully retiring in 2010. Memorial service and celebration of his life will be held tomorrow at 1:30 at the First United Methodist Church in downtown Manhattan. Jack is survived by his wife Jan, 2 sons, Brian, Steve, and Steve's wife Kelly, 2 grandsons, and 1 brother. And Agriculture Today extends its great condolences to the Riley family for the passing of Dr. Jack Riley. Again, one of the good ones. U.S. wheat growers likely to lose some market share in Japan in the coming years because of a free trade agreement between Japan and the European Union and the newly constituted Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's according to a new USDA report. The Foreign Agricultural Service report highlights the impact of 2 trade deals in Japan that would lower tariffs on a variety of wheat products, including pasta and flour. While the U.S. was responsible for 45% of Japan's wheat imports, that's about $630 million of the $1.4 billion in total wheat imports, the U.S. could lose more of the wheat market as that EU-Japan deal comes into force as early as next year. Japan is also championing changes under the newly reworked Trans-Pacific Partnership as countries work to implement that pact without U.S. participation. President Trump, as you know, withdrew the U.S. from the TPP nearly a year ago. This Foreign Agricultural Service report goes on to say that Japan concluded talks with the EU just last month, and several of the tariff reductions offered to Europe largely resemble the concessions that Japan made in the TPP agreement negotiation. Currently, roughly 95% of Japan's wheat comes from 3 U.S. varieties: dark northern spring, western white, and hard red winter wheat, as well as Canadian western spring wheat and Australian standard white wheat. Under the EU and Pacific Trade Pacts, Europe, Canada, and Australia would see increases in tariff-free export volumes to Japan, and the markup of tariffs for additional volumes of wheat would be cut by 45% as well over time. Now, this report comes after leadership from U.S. Wheat Associates and the National Association of Wheat Growers wrote the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative back in October to strongly urge that office to pivot away from renegotiating trade deals and toward opening new markets. The statement came after the U.S. had announced renegotiations over the South Korea free trade agreement. Want to remind you producers once again that there are 2 more of those Farming for the Future conferences that K-State is putting on, and those are set for next week, Wednesday, January the 10th in Scott City, and Thursday, January the 11th in Emporia. This is the last of the series, and if you'd like to take part in these, you need to hasten your registration by contacting the extension offices in either Scott or Lyon County right away. The Kansas Wheat Innovation Center, located on the K-State campus, has just expanded its capacity for facilitating cutting-edge wheat-based research. Marcia Boswell has more on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
The warm orange glow of the greenhouses at the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center provide a welcoming nightlight to Kimball Avenue. But most passersby don't realize the plants grown inside are the future of Kansas agriculture. That glow recently became a little bigger thanks to a new 4-bay greenhouse expansion that will help get cutting-edge wheat genetics into the hands of Kansas farmers faster. These new greenhouses will be used for public-private collaborative wheat research. According to Aaron Harries, Vice President of Research and Operations for Kansas Wheat, this new space will position the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas State University to take full advantage of new wheat research discoveries that seem to be emerging every day. Some of the brightest wheat research minds and best facilities in the world are located here in Manhattan, thanks to the investment by Kansas farmers. These new greenhouses will be the home to researchers from the Wheat Genetics Resource Center, Kansas State University's Poland Lab for Wheat Genetics, and Heartland Plant Innovations. While the WGRC already has lab space and a gene bank at the Innovation Center, it will soon move into its own greenhouse bay in the expansion. Researchers for the WGRC are working to discover genes for resistance to viral, bacterial, fungal, and insect pests. Once these genes are identified, they are transferred to modern breeding lines, ultimately to be released for farmers around the world. The Poland Lab for Wheat Genetics at Kansas State University focuses on developing improved wheat germplasm, along with novel breeding tools and methodologies. Research areas include technologies such as developing uses for drones in wheat improvement, high-throughput phenotyping, prediction models for wheat breeding, genome sequencing, and much more. Heartland Plant Innovations works to develop advanced technologies for gene discovery, trait validation, and crop improvement. It was created with the intent of revolutionizing plant breeding and genetics. HPI focuses on doubled haploid production, a process that cuts 5 to 7 years off of wheat variety development, contract research, and wide crossing, a joint program with the WGRC that inserts traits from ancient wheat into modern varieties. The 12,750 square foot expansion was constructed adjacent to the existing 4 greenhouse bays, offices, and laboratories at the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center. The majority of the funding for the expansion came from the U.S. Economic Development Administration, Kansas State University, and the Kansas Wheat Commission, with additional support from the Dane G. Hansen Foundation. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. Exciting times at the Wheat Innovation Center. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Rounding out this Agriculture Today, time for another look at Kansas agricultural weather. Our first visit of the new year with research and extension climatologist here at K-State, Mary Knapp. And we usher in 2018, Mary, with a very chilly overtone to it. Awfully cold out there to start the new year.
Well, it's been awfully cold in the eastern part of the state. Now, the western part of the state actually had a very nice warm-up after the first of the year, and they were in their 50s yesterday, so very nice for them. But generally, statewide, the week was much colder than normal. The week ending on January 2nd was averaging 9 degrees cooler than normal, and some places were as much as 16 degrees cooler than normal. So again, a very, very chilly end to 2017 and start to 2018. There was a little bit of moisture during our break. We did get a Christmas Eve snowstorm. Again, not evenly spread across the state. The northern and eastern portions of the state saw much more than the southwest and south central. In fact, those areas saw nothing as far as moisture. And indeed, when we look at the December total, Garden Cities was a trace, as was Dodge City, and that was representative of a lot of that area. A couple of hundredths of an inch to a trace. So again, a very dry end to the year, and we haven't seen much in the way of the moisture to start the 2018 season.
So on that score, how far behind are we generally with our moisture?
Again, it depends upon where you're at. In the western divisions, they actually had a few that were at over what they normally would for 2017. In the east, it's 5 to 6 inches below what they would normally see for the year. Of course, we've just started January, and January is one of our drier months. Here in Manhattan, we're about 5/100ths of an inch behind for the year, which is not much. We don't dig our hole quite as quickly in January as we would in March. So again, we're not changing conditions very rapidly. By the same token, if we get a wetter than normal week in January, it's not going to make huge inroads on the drought that we see in play right now.
And the drought monitor tells us that clearly no relief for the last week, 2 weeks or so. Has it worsened any?
We had a big expansion in the last week in December where we went to abnormally dry across the state and a jump in moderate and severe drought. There was not much change this week. Again, we don't change conditions very rapidly at this time of the year. That was helped by the fact that we had very cold temperatures. A lot of the surface water ponds were frozen over, so we weren't losing water to evaporation as rapidly as we did earlier in December when things were still open.
Now, there's talk of moisture this weekend. How widespread in Kansas, and how much are we potentially talking about here?
Well, unfortunately, it looks like it's going to be mostly an eastern event, maybe making it out as far as central Kansas, say in the Russell area. When you get out into western Kansas, the amounts that they were talking about are pretty light and the probabilities are pretty low. But they keep revising what that outlook would be. Pessimistically, we're looking at 1/100th to 1/10th of an inch. Some of the more optimistic model runs call for as much as 3/4 of an inch of moisture in the eastern areas of the state. The area that has the best chance for that heavier moisture is southeastern Kansas because, again, it's looking like it's going to be pulling some of that moisture up from the Gulf that's going to train through Arkansas and Missouri, and it's a question of how far west that gets drug.
And by and large in the form of rain?
Again, it depends upon the timing of whether it's with that warm air coming in or if it's overrunning some colder air at the surface. There is some talk of some freezing drizzle late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, going to all rain on Sunday. So, again, it depends upon the temperatures as to what form that will take. We've got a lot of cold surfaces out there, so if we're hovering right about the freezing mark, it's more likely that those elevated surfaces will freeze, even if the temperatures are not quite at freezing, because, again, given the icebox that we have been in for most of this last week, we've got a lot of very cold ground.
So stay heads up as you travel around the next couple of days or so. And have we put the harsh cold behind us for a while now?
It's difficult to tell. At this point, the outlook is neutral, equally likely for cold or warm. What they're really looking at is when that polar vortex is going to shift positions. Right now, it's basically opened the Arctic north into the eastern half of the U.S., and Kansas is on the western edge of that. There is some indication that that pattern may shift and move more towards Europe, with the warm air that has been plaguing Alaska shifting more to the central U.S. So a breakdown of the ridge and a shift in where that trough is positioned could bring us a chance for some milder weather. And indeed, when you look at the Weather Service outlook for the next week to 10 days, they do call for moderation of that much colder than normal conditions. So we'll see how that plays out, whether it actually breaks down as they anticipate. The other thing that we were watching is there is some indication that these Pacific systems that have been coming along the Pacific Northwest may shift to the south, and we may get a series of storms coming along Southern California. We're watching that because that Southern California track favors a four-corner storm, which again, in turn, tends to bring more moisture into the Central Plains as that system tracks eastward. So, again, if it rains in Southern California, the chances for us seeing some of that moisture are much better than rains in the Pacific Northwest.
That will be a much welcome change in our fortunes, to be sure. We'll keep an eye on that. Mary, enjoy your weekend. Thanks for stopping over once again.
Thanks, Eric.
Mary Knapp, Research and Extension climatologist here at K-State. She's with us each Friday to talk Kansas agricultural weather. And we thank you for being along with us as well. Do enjoy your weekend. Likewise, Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.